Join us on a journey where we unravel the latest trends, tackle your burning questions, and explore innovative strategies that are shaping the future of compensation, all with a cup of coffee in hand. Hello, and welcome back to Comp and Coffee. I'm Ruth Thomas, Chief Compensation Strategist here at Payscale. Today's episode is kind of personal for us as leaders and as women, and as people who believe in the power of fair pay to change lives and businesses. There's been a lot of noise, frankly, in 2025 about pulling back from pay equity and about shifting priorities. If you can see me, I'm doing shifting priorities in quote marks, and about whether fairness really still matters. I think we wanted to take this moment in this episode to say at Payscale, we're not shifting, we're doubling down on the importance of fair pay, because the hard truth is that fair pay means nothing if no one believes in it. And our recent Fair Pay Impact Report that we released showed that 68% of employees today think that they're underpaid, even when they aren't. So even when they're paid above or at market. And those perceptions, they're driving disengagement, burnout, and regrettable attrition. So today I've invited two women I'm lucky enough to get to work with every day here on our executive leadership team, Lexi Clarke, our Chief People Officer, and Kate Peter, our Chief Customer Officer. And we're not here just to talk about the numbers, but about the people behind them. So welcome back, both of you, to the podcast. I think the last time we did one together was back in April, and just after we'd all been together in Austin. We have all just been together again in Atlanta. We mainly visit cities beginning with the letter A. But reintroduce yourself to the audience. This may be the first episode anybody's ever listened to. So Lexi, do you want to start off first? Just tell the audience who you are.
Yes. Lexi Clarke, Chief People Officer. Always honored to be on the podcast, especially with these two. I have been at Payscale 5 years. Most of my background Payscale is in early to mid-stage tech in the Seattle area, which is where I am still based. And it is sunny today in Seattle, which I am enjoying the last days of summer before we go into gray, rainy season.
Thank you, Lexi. And Kate, welcome back.
Thank you. Total honor to be here. Second time. Kate Peter, Chief Customer Officer, been here for 11 months now, I'm going to say. And I lead our customer organization. So that's, everything from implementation and onboarding, solutions consulting, all the way to the renewals end of the spectrum and support. So incredibly excited to be here. Before I was here, I had the honor of working at sort of mid-level tech startups, if you will, the likes of Gainsight, Harvard Business Review, and Anaplan. So very excited to be here today. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you both. Okay, so there's been a lot of political rhetoric this year that's tried to push pay equity out of the spotlight. But for us here at Payscale, it's not optional. We still believe fundamentally it's foundational. So Kate, let's start with you first and gather your thoughts around this. As a customer advocate and executive, why do you think it's important that Payscale stays loud about fair pay right now?
I think it's such a, I'm very good at saying loud. So that's the first thing. And I love an organization that really deeply believes in the mission and really gets loud. So first things first, I don't think you're ever going to turn me down, nor do I think that anyone's going to turn down the three of us. So that just sort of comes with the territory. But right now, I think staying loud really comes down to I'm talking to customers quite a bit. And there is this feeling of there's a cost that they are paying from disbelief from their employees around whether or not they are being paid fairly, which ultimately leads to all the things in the report: engagement loss, attrition, culture erosion. And so I honestly feel like if we're not out front talking about it, we're really not doing justice to our industry and our customers. I honestly think because it's a little bit of this, it's a trust thing. I'm always going to come back to Francis Fry and the trust triangle. I've talked about it before, I think even on this podcast, where to me, it's if people don't believe that you have logic, if people don't believe that you're authentic and they don't believe that you have empathy, they really aren't going to trust you. And so a lot of what we're doing with our customers right now is just sort of working through, here's the data. So you've got the logic. Now, how can you really bring sort of the empathy and the authenticity to those conversations? So we're going to continue to be loud to do
Great, thank you. And Lexi, as the sitting in the chief people officer seat, how do you hold fair pay as non-negotiable, even when priorities are shifting externally?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we've talked about it even on this podcast before, like, I feel like once pay transparency really started to like kind of take hold and take fire across the country, like you can't put the cat back in the bag. Is that what the reference can of worms? I something back in something. You can't stop it. I think the conversation around it. And I do think, what we've talked about before is like, even if the landscape is changing around how we talk about pay equity, the reality is compensation is still more top of mind for folks than ever. It just might look a little different in how it comes up in a conversation. So I think the question from a kind of practitioner point of view is like, how do you keep it for like front and center, even when priorities shift? I think there's two ways to look at it. One, fundamentally, like the right thing to do, right? Like it is the right thing to do to not lose hold of that and your commitment that you've made to your employees. I also think from an engagement point of view, or also from, a lens where you're trying to eliminate kind of distraction across the organization, like you will have more engaged employees if they fundamentally understand how much they make and how those decisions are made. That is something that we have seen time and time again. And if you don't lose sight of that, then I think you can always keep it front and center in everything that you do. And that doesn't always need to be a heavy conversation. Once you've really like done that initial cleanup, I think weaving it into how those processes work moving forward becomes, I want to say that I'm going to use the word easier, even though us practitioners on the call know that it's never easy, an easier conversation across the board.
Yeah. And I think if you've been reading how we've been talking about it at Payscale this year, it's, the teams that I oversee in the marketing team, it's very much focusing on that business imperative angle. Like, why is fair pay important to your business? We believe in like putting the messaging into your hands as the compensation pros and the HR pros that are listening to this. Of course, pay equity and treating people equally from a pay perspective is still the law. That hasn't changed. And also pay transparency laws are still passing as we speak. And so the requirement to be more transparent about pay is becoming, a day-to-day requirement. But sometimes when we focus on pay equity is the right thing to do, which we all, I know, 100% agree with here on this call, we sometimes lose sight of that, like the fair pay, what I call the fair pay equation, which is what you just said, Lexi, which is really, fair pay for me, that equals trust, which equals engagement, which equals productivity and innovation. And every business leader needs to understand that. So, whilst people might feel they want to walk away from it because it's potentially politically charged, I think reminding our business leaders of the importance of fair pay as a key strategic lever in your business is really important. So thinking about that fair pay impact report, what really hit us was that 2/3 of employees feel they're underpaid, even when they're earning at or above market. And what's interesting is we did this study last time back in 2021, and that perception is actually growing, not shrinking. So it had grown by 17%, which feels completely weird because if you think everything that's happened since 2021 in terms of pay equity and pay transparency, like what is going on, Lexi? What's going wrong with the employee experience of compensation? And why don't people believe us, even when the numbers say that they're being paid fairly?
I think there's a couple things I would ground in. One is that it's not surprising that feeling has grown, mostly because I think there's more data than ever at employees' fingertips or candidates' fingertips to go and see what they're worth. The other reality that comes along with that is that if you as an employer are not talking to your employees about how you decide on their compensation, and all they see is what they can find online, those two things likely there's some questions, right? It raises some questions, and that when it raises questions raises, I think fundamental kind of trust. So I think it's not surprising to me, given the amount of just data and I think like noise, and also like compensation has been a hot topic. Like it is a sexy headline right now, whether that's, related to inflation or pay transparency or anything else. I think that, the companies that are really continuing that commitment and getting it right is the companies that are not stopping talking about it. And talking about it is not a once a year kind of activity, but it's a like, here's how we post on our job postings. Here's how you can figure out where you are within your range. Here's how to progress in your career. Like, they're taking, I think, those moments really seriously with their employee base, and they're finding every opportunity they can to reconfirm or re-evangelize or, whatever the case might be. And so, I think that I think it's not a surprising stat. It makes me sad, like personally sad, that folks are feeling that way. But I do think, we have lost sight of that. The royal we, colloquial we, whatever you will, lost sight of that over the last few years, just given everything that's been going on. And I don't think anywhere is quite figured out exactly how to make sure that it's in every stage of the employee experience in a way where employees can also ask those questions so that, you're saying it over and over and over again so folks know that nothing is changing.
Yeah. And I think, we see that in like the data when we survey people around how transparent have they got, and that, while there are many of our customers, Kate, your customers doing great work here, the needle's not shifting at a rapid rate in terms of that pay transparency adoption. When you're talking to customers, Kate, what are you seeing on the ground in terms of employee trust around pay?
Yeah, I think everything that Lexi said around the ability to have these conversations during a shift in sort of society too, has been really interesting, because we have moved more towards transparency with the pay bands online and being able to see what people are paid. And yet, what I hear from customers is, our pay is competitive. You're showing us our pay is competitive. We're showing up competitive on job boards and sites, right? So why are people still walking? Why are people still, why is engagement still low on this topic? And not to, sort of overdo this point, but it has to be a trust thing for me, where specifically the frontline leaders, the managers being trained to be able to have conversations about, hey, I understand that this spreadsheet here might say fair pay, but let's have a conversation together about, your specific feelings about this, and then being able to have those conversations and hear that hard bit of feedback, and then be able to give a very logical yet empathetic response back as to why, in fact, this is competitive, and give them a little bit of that like behind the scenes view, because it's not just about being competitive. It's about having the trust within the employee base. So we get into very nerdy conversations with our customers about that quite often, and I think that's where the CHRO having a seat at the table, having a seat at the boardroom table, all of those things are so much more important right now, because you have to have a strategy behind that in order to execute as a business. And that's your best partner in crime as a business leader to be able to do that.
And when I think about why that number grew, from when we did the study back in 2021, another thing I think is I don't think employees are still feeling the cost of living crunch. I don't think anybody probably says they feel better off than they did do back in 2021. And, whether when we look at the metrics, in theory, real wages have outpaced CPI in that time period, but it doesn't feel like that to a lot of people. I mean, do you get that feeling from you're obviously managing the employee base here at Payscale, Lexi?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on. I also think to your point, Ruth, I think even the conversation around inflation, right? Cost of living inflation, all of it, I think has not gone away. It's just kind of shifted and changed. I also think, bringing any new administration and new kind of change in how you're talking about it, just breeds more uncertainty around, okay, what's going to happen? And what does that look like from a macroeconomic environment? And I think we still don't know, right? You're closer on a lot of the conversations around the economist stuff than I am, Ruth. But, there's still, I think, a question of what does this mean for the markets? There's been a lot of volatility this year, right? We've seen both good news stories and bad news stories, just in terms of kind of how things have progressed. And all of that impacts jobs. It impacts pay. It impacts security around wages. It impacts security in general, kind of within your role. So I think all of those questions, that causes a point of friction or compression with employees as well. Because if they're reading headlines all the time while they're working, whether they're hybrid or remote or, fully in office, there's always something in the back of their mind going, well, what does that mean for the company I'm at? And what does that mean for how much I get paid? And what does that mean for merit next year? And how can I make sure that I can, plan to take care of myself and the rest of my family? I think it becomes this underlying kind of question. And I don't think it has gone away. And I guess it not going away means this question has not gone away. And even more, again, then you combine that with what I said, which is some of the increase in just the amount of data, everything that is out there. And it means employees or individuals are overloaded with information where, as a company, you can create that almost point of clarity. It's the light at the end of the tunnel to say, I'm going to give you clarity on how you're paid. I'm going to give you clarity on how we're financially performing. I'm going to give you clarity. And it's not always going to be a perfectly rosy answer, but it is going to be a point of clarity. And I think people seek clarity in times of unknown.
Yeah. And it's going to be tough going through, we're in mid-year cycle at the moment, but we're going to be many organizations are planning for year end. Our latest SBS, our salary budget survey here at Payscale, we're going to be talking about that on a future episode very soon. But we're seeing, that pay increases are coming down in terms of what employers are planning to budget in 2026. So there's going to be some tough conversations that need to be had. And I think that's when transparency around the why is going to be really important. But we know transparency is important. Referring back to that Fair Pay Impact Report, we saw that employees in high transparent organizations are 59% less likely to leave. But the reality is transparency isn't just a one-time email or a comp band PDF. It's really about building an ongoing relationship. We've talked about it, an ongoing relationship of trust. So Lexi, let's start with you. What does real transparency look like in a company? What's a conversation or practice that's really worked for you?
Yeah, I'll even be vulnerable and talk about probably where this has gone wrong. When we've tried it too, I remember when we first started to go transparent, I was so excited. I was it's in the trainings. We have a Confluence page, our own intranet. We have an FAQ. Look at us. We're crushing it. And then it was later in the year, someone that had clearly started after that point was well, wait a minute. How do we pay people? What does that look like? And the first the first reaction you have is to get defensive, right? You're excuse me, there is a published FAQ. What do you mean you haven't seen it? And really what I have now learned is anytime that you can get defensive around things like communication, you're okay, if everyone's asking that question, it means I maybe haven't done my job at, putting that in the right place. So I just think continuous communication in different avenues, in different channels, and in different places, I think is really key here. I still don't feel by the way, we got it perfect internally. And I ask for feedback from our employee base and our leaders every single year. I think we've made a ton of progress. I almost swore. Did you see that, Ruth? Did you watch that almost happen? But I'm getting better at not swearing on the podcast. I think we've gotten a lot better, but I think there's still work to do. And I think what that looks like, my dream state, is it's threaded through the employee experience so that you can just never miss it. You never miss it. It is not it's not one time a year. It's not 2 times a year. It's, Chris always says compensation should be always on. I think about transparency as always on. Transparency to me, by the way, is, to your original question, different depending on where you are in that journey. So using Payscale as the example, we are transparent around ranges, comp ratio, potential earnings, all of those other things. We give you that range. That's in the job descriptions. We tell you when we're in compensation cycles where you are within that range. We have dedicated compensation trainings that talk to you around the data sets that we use and how we think about it, the percentiles we target, the markets we target, all of those other pieces. It took us a long time to get there. So I have also been at organizations where the level of transparency is, here's the cycle, here's how we make comp decisions, here's how we think about promotions internally within the organization. And we're not in a place yet where we can share with you the data sets we're using or the survey cuts or anything like that. It is all going to be dependent on where you are within that journey. And transparency is not a one-size-fits-all exercise. It is a one-size-fits-none. So you've got to fit it to where you are or where the company is on their journey. And then you've got to think about transparency is almost in the eye of the beholder, right? So you've got to think about, even if I feel like I'm being super transparent, somebody else might not. And so I've got to make sure that I have that feedback loop with employees to tell me I don't have the information I need, or I don't understand, or I still have questions, or my questions aren't always answered. You're not always going to be everything to everyone. But I think you can, work really hard to create those different ways of catching all of those different audiences and making sure that the message is resonating.
So, Kate, you're a manager of probably one of the biggest groups, I think. Because it's the biggest group at Payscale, the customer org? Yes, it is. So how do you think about, as a manager, like communicating pay or pay transparency? Like how do you feel that you've evolved in that? Or do you feel equipped for that? What do you feel you need for that to kind of make that come to life in your organization and with the people that report to you?
I will tell you, I've been schooled by Payscale since getting here in the best possible way. I won't lie. I'm a pretty competitive person when I'm out there in the market trying to get somebody, I've got this like talent I want to bring in, right? Like I got to understand, I can say very authentically to my team that we very much believe in pay transparency and pay equity, because I have seen behind the scenes here of what it's like to say, oh my God, but this person just needs more and here's why. And the comeback of like, well, that will create inequities in our system and here's why. And I just I think I needed that as a leader, if I'm being honest. Like I needed to see the inner workings really did stay very, very true, even when it was hard, right? Even when it felt like, oh my God, okay, well, what are we going to do? We don't get this kid. It was what I needed. I needed to see it so that now when I talk to my employees, I'm like this, look at what we have here. We've got something really special, and we're able to do the comp ratios, and we're able to do the benchmarking for you. And this is the career path that you might want to take. And we've got all of this data, but we also stay true to it behind the scenes. And I think giving your leaders the ability to see behind the curtain and to see that you're holding yourselves accountable at the company level to making sure that you're doing things transparently in the right way gives them that much more confidence when they speak to the team. So honestly, like before, what I was doing was probably just being like, let's have like huggy conversations. And of course I believe in you. And here's what it is. Now I'm doing it with data, but I'm also doing it with a lot of authenticity because I was able to see behind the scenes.
Yeah. And we've obviously led the charge on this here at Payscale because it's what we do for a living, but it's also what we believe in. But I do think, that being consistent and that ongoing visibility, once that gets embedded and people are kind of used to that, it becomes so much easier. These conversations become so much easier, and every new hire conversation you have, every, review conversation you have, every career development conversation, it just becomes a lot easier. Because as managers, you've got that bedrock of training around like what is the process we've gone through, how we're trying to manage internal equity. So I think if you're starting your journey and you're listening to the podcast, we know many people are focusing on how do we get pay comms in place. It's, just do the hard work. It will become easier as it starts to get embedded in the culture and the way that your managers think. It does become easier. Well, we're all women in the C-suite here, and we've probably all had some moments where we've questioned if we were being paid fairly or if we were being taken seriously for asking. And that gives us a unique lens. I'm interested now, we're going to get a bit personal. Again, have you had a personal moment that shaped the way you approach pay transparency and trust today, something that still drives you in your work today? Lexi, let's start with you first. Have you had a personal moment that shaped the way you approach pay transparency and trust today?
I think I've had a couple. So early in my career, I remember I had some leadership change at one of the companies that I was at, and during that leadership change, this is never the way I think that you should deliver. I think it was well intentioned, but the impact. They came to me and they were like, "Well, I looked at your pay and I was shocked at how much money you made." As in, it's too low. And they were like, I was shocked. I mean, you don't make enough money. And I remember I was like, fresh out of college, a couple of years out of college, I was like, what? What do you mean? I thought it was fine, not knowing any better. So I guess lesson for that, that was a lesson for me where I was like, oh man, I need to be probably more in touch with the market and more in touch with what's going on. And also there's like a know your worth kind of thing there. But that was like, what a way to learn it. And then, I just talked about some of this actually when we were in Atlanta last week, but I had like a mental goal for myself to be a director by the time that I turned 30. I was really excited to come to Payscale because it like fit in all of my career aspirations and fit that timeline and all these other things. But I remember, I was running kind of multiple functions at my, last opportunity, and I had asked for a director role. And the answer I got was like, you're tremendously valuable, you're great, all these other things, but we're just like not quite sure what a director level looks like for you. So we're going to wait. We're going to, even though, there's in leadership flux and some of these things, we're just going to wait and figure out if somebody else can figure out, like, we think you've done a bunch of work. And like, it just was a moment where I was like, oh, but I know that I can go get this opportunity elsewhere. And, I was how many years down the road, right? Like that first instance of being told I didn't make enough money. And now I was at a place where I was like, wait a minute, I think I should maybe have a different title. There's a, knowing and kind of acknowledging your worth, being able to quantify those types of moments that I think have been really, those were big for me. And I think they were big for me in the, never wanting to be too early or too late to recognize where someone is. And also, so early in my career, like I wish I knew. Nobody sits you down and they're like, hey, so you're going to get into your career and you're going to have to advocate for yourself and you're going to have to know your worth. And here's how to know your worth. Like no one has that conversation with you. You just kind of learn it as you go from people around you. And I remember, a previous, like I wish that I knew that early in my career. So those things I think have shaped like my commitment and just, the knowledge. And then you think to yourself, you're like, how many people don't, right? How many people don't?
And Kate, what about you? Have you had a personal moment that shaped the way you approach thinking about pay transparency and pay equity today?
Yeah, I think very similar to Lexi. I have a few that sort of stick out in my mind. And I think each one of them had me sort of test myself. I think it's really easy to go back and be like, oh, I wish that person, had done something different for me versus like taking very much what Lexi said and just flipping it and be like, okay, how do I advocate for myself? But I remember being sort of earlier in my career in a senior level role. And that's right around the time that people started posting pay bands. And when I saw, I think that you guys probably experienced this much closer than I did at the time. But when I saw the band, and I think maybe even this goes back to your last question, Ruth, about like, why is belief gone down over time since the pay bands are out? And it could have been similar experiences to the one I had where the band came out for the same role that I had, and it was way higher. Just like light years. Like I wasn't even on a map, right? And I had to have this moment of, just sort of sitting down and being like, I don't even know, who do I go? Who do I go to? Like, I should be happy that we're being transparent, but like, and I remember just having this woman sit me down and she was like, you need to negotiate like a man. I'm putting that in quotes, right? Like you didn't do that when you came in, and that's where you start off. And, while everything she was saying was probably factually true, I just wanted someone to explain it to me and be there for me. I didn't want to sit in silence. For me, silence ended up breeding inequity in that scenario because I just didn't say anything. And all of a sudden I was like, wait, everybody else was farther ahead. So I've sort of made it a mission recently to like advocate, even for the people who work for me. I'll be like, okay, you need to remember that part of this is, being able to come and advocate for yourself and have tough conversations with me and tell me what you need so we can have open and honest conversations. And I do that for other women outside of here as well. And just be like, okay, because while we, I think, have everything transparent as best we can, we still make mistakes here. There are other companies who don't. And I like to reach out and mentor them as well, because that experience, that was not a good day or a good year, probably for me.
Yeah, I love that though, where you reference the fact that, there was this next shocking moment when people started to see the pay ranges on job postings and were like, hey, what is going on? So you're right, maybe that's what's, led to this jump in people feeling that they're underpaid. And I love the thing about advocating. I think, I've been in a slightly weird position because I worked in reward, like in-house for the first 15 years of my career. So I knew what everyone was paid. So if anyone was going to pay me unfairly, I was going to know about it. So I was in a very privileged position. Then I ran my own company for 10 years and kind of that's a completely different position. And then obviously I came to Payscale where we obviously practice what we preach. But as I've gone into the C-suite, I think I have this thing about thinking more about like, what am I bringing to the business and being able to articulate in order to kind of like say why I'm here and why I should be, treated and paid fairly or equitably to my peers on the C-suite. And that's something I've been thinking about a lot more. And again, as you say, like thinking how you can help other people into like thinking about what their worth is, what value they're contributing to the business. So okay, so well, thank you for both of you for joining me today. The Fair Pay Impact Report really was a wake-up call this year. We know that if fair pay isn't believed, it's not trusted and it won't retain your people. So if there's one thing we would leave the listeners with that they could do this quarter to rebuild trust in how pay decisions are made, what would you say as a line manager, Kate, first? What would you encourage people to do to rebuild that trust?
I'd say you can't fix what you don't acknowledge. Maybe it goes back to my story a little bit ago about like feeling like I had to be the one yelling about it versus, the company actually acknowledging, what they were doing and how they were doing it with pay bands and with becoming transparent. Employees are telling us they don't believe us. So our job as leaders is to literally provide sort of the logic, the authenticity, and the empathy to acknowledge and help them get there. And so that's what I would say is like, this is all of us as leaders coming together and making sure that we have open and honest conversations that are data informed and backed.
And Lexi, from your perspective?
I think it's, everything that we just talked about, all of these conversations, I think it's 2025, all this pay transparency legislation has happened. Like everyone has seen it all over the news and the internet. But I think that it still feels, if you're a practitioner or you're a leader, it still feels hard. Like this conversation and an open conversation around compensation still feels fully loaded. It feels hard. It feels heavy. Some of that I think is coming off of years of, that not being an okay conversation to have or being very taboo. I think if you're a practitioner listening or a leader in your organization or just an employee, I think making these conversations feel like giving permission for the space. And I think giving safety for the space. Yeah. And by that, I mean like either having that conversation or making sure that if you are having that conversation, you can make it feel normal. Like I always think when someone comes to me, even if I'm in a place where I want to defend the data and like all these things around why we did it, realizing that even if I'm super close to the data, this person isn't. So as long as I can make it feel like the conversation is safe and okay, that impact then will carry on with them through either leading their organization or how they interact moving forward. And that's impact. And I think the more that we give permission for these conversations and conversations around compensation, the easier it gets to drive fair pay. Like I just think the more we make it not this behind the scenes curtain scary thing, and the more that we just are really open in learning and also listening, I think that's the biggest. You can do all the right things and all the trainings. And again, my FAQ documents are beautiful, but I think that ultimately it comes down to the quality of the conversation. And that's what people are going to remember.
Great advice. Well, thank you, Lexi and Kate, for joining me today and for bringing your voices, your vulnerability and your leadership to this conversation. I think the takeaway is, if you've read the report, the Fair Pay Impact Report, employees are telling us they don't believe in how pay decisions are made. And if we don't rebuild that trust, then we will lose our best people, no matter how fair or generous our comp strategy is on paper. So to everyone listening, now's the time to act. Start the conversations, train your managers, audit your structures, use the data, and be human in how you deliver it. We'll link to the full Fair Pay Impact Report in the show notes and comments. And we want to hear from you. What's keeping you up at night when it comes to pay transparency and trust? How do you feel about the whole topic of fair pay? Email us at coffee@payscale.com. And we will look forward to hearing your comments and seeing you on another episode of Comp and Coffee soon. Thank you very much, Lexi and Kate.
Thank you.
You.